I've been asked to lead the peer review, and admittedly after our last meeting, I think we all kind of struggled with what was coming next and how we're going to proceed. So with that and with the leadership team, we've kind of developed some procedures and give you some solid evidence of what needs to be in a scenario and how we're going to actually proceed and so we can move forward. So that's the whole idea of this. As Brad said, if you turn to the last 2 pages where it starts out scenario contracting procedures, this kind of outlines in a brief form of what actually is going to happen. It was handed out to you at the very beginning. Right. So the idea of this is it will be on a somewhat a contract basis where you as faculty with your administrators are going to develop this scenario contract. And I'll tell you what's going to be in that contract in the next page. And that gets submitted to the scenario review committee, of which I'm the chairman, leadership committee, and as I will pull in others as we review and decide whether we're going to approve those. In that contract, there will be a draft proposal that will be, once again, a draft of what it's going to be, and your budget and timeline, so you know what you're going to be paid. After the review committee approves it, maybe makes some suggestions, then you get that back and your school will oversee that, get you paid, however you've stated in that contract that you want to make paid, and along with advice and counsel during that time, you'll then start actually creating and building that scenario. We want you to make sure it's field tested. That's part of that review process, fully vetted. And so right before you actually field tested in one of your classrooms or in somebody's classroom, we'll look at it again real quick just to make suggestions and modifications if necessary. Once you field tested it, of course, there's going to be modifications to it. And then we'll click that little box as Dan suggested and make it available to everyone. Okay? Yes?
Can you describe who's on the committee that reviews it?
The review committee will be myself, probably the leadership team, and maybe 1 or 2 others. We may ship it out to a content expert or a business just to double check and make sure it sounds, you've got the right kind of business thing and the business problem does sound real, I guess is my point.
I think we had a little bit of compensation, like $50 or something like that, to do a review process by
right.
one of you guys.
Yeah.
And it is peer review. So,
yes.
Right. So hopefully there will be other site coordinators or scenario developers. The leadership team actually will have a very small role in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Although we'll be involved, it's not MCIT who gets to determine a good scenario.
It'll be.
It's you guys.
Right.
So
okay.
That's the vetting process.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So I wanted to start this out with this first page is kind of definitions and what I understand what for the NSF grant and what we understand, so we're all on the same page as to what is in a scenario. So I've got a couple definitions there. So the idea that these scenarios are problem-based scenarios. In other words, the students are given a real business problem to solve, or as real as possible to solve, which students learn the course objectives by solving the problem. So it's not necessarily, we're not talking project-based here, we're talking problem-based. And that a scenario is this idea of a detailed description of a business environment where the students are treated as if they were employees of a company and specific activities or tasks are completed. So we're talking something that's really close to problem-based case, but it's problem-based scenario, where before the problem-based case is, oh, here's a problem, there you go do it. Now we can be a little more specific in saying, in helping the students scaffold through what they really need to do. So the idea of the task is, here's what you need to do in your teams. You need to go look at this resource, read this book, read the chapter in the book, or go do this thing, and here's the deliverable. So that's, we're kind of switching gears, so it's not just open-ended, and it's more directed. One of the problems we've had with sharing our cases is I write a case and I know how to deliver it, but I give it to Dora and she looks at it and says, how do I do that? Or I look at Dora's and I see her case and problem and it doesn't make any sense to me. So hopefully we'll build through that with the scenarios and it will be more shareable. So as I see there are some key elements then in this scenario. And those are the bulleted items there. In other words, we have a description where the students are employed, and we have a pure definition, we have a good definition of what those students are doing within the company. So whether it's a programming company and the students are junior programmers, it's a, help me out with an example. It's another kind of company, it's an architectural company, and the students have to provide wireless or have to configure wireless or whatever it is. They have a role within that company to do. So it's like they're being placed out there in that company and they're doing those roles. The problem that you present to them is something that's fairly complex. It can have multiple solutions, so they need to work together as a team to provide what that solution is. My idea of a problem base is we don't get down to the point where they're doing step by step, but we still give them a methodology and scaffold them through that problem. So it is team-based. They're learning by doing and communicating through this web-based interface through our MCIT cloud. Yes?
I just want to back up and make a comment on the scenario-based stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When I taught system analysis and design, I was overwhelmed with the book because it would have this scenario, well, one that you follow all the way through, which was better. But what I did is I tried to teach them the concepts of the process, and then we did our own project in the class because it was overwhelming when you try to attach a name to a title and try to keep all that straight. So if we could simplify the scenario, you are the programmer, or
Yes.
And use titles, not people. Is that on the
Right.
same way?
You are the junior administrator, or you are one member of a team of junior administrators that are doing this task. Is that?
Yeah, because the other book would do a scenario in the book, and it'll say this person does this, and then they refer to that person, and the dialogue would be, these two people are talking, you're going, what do they do?
John and Mary are talking?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Use titles. Yeah.
So would you
Yeah.
have like job descriptions created then too?
Yes. Yeah. So the student knows what job they're doing within that company, which in a little bit we'll see where that ties back. Really cool. Okay. So the task, the idea is the scenario. Once again, we're going to use that cloud. They're going to go into the MCIT cloud through their CareerLink account. They're going to use that virtualized environment to do whatever it is, create a website, do connections, whatever it is. So they're going to use that. The task and deliverables hopefully are based on industry standards. The focus on that stated essential learning objectives that we'll get to when we look at the draft. So this is one of the things that always bothered me with Ruth Loring and the case study. It's like, well, let's pick a business and let's pick a problem and let's work the case. And well, what'd you learn? Well, I don't know. We learned some math. We got to look at it the other way. We all have content we have to get through. So let's look at what objective we want to do and then start there. Start building, okay, if this is the objective, how do I do the problem? How do I start working through that with the scenario? And how do I lead those students through that, through this scenario and those tasks so that they can build and learn? So I always start with the objective.
I always wondered how the launcher is going to score those.
Yeah, no, that's so
Is that going
ambiguous.
to be something that's going to be built in,
rubrics, so the
Gotta have
rubrics and
some
stuff.
sort
Well,
of
yeah.
gradient associated with it,
Right, yeah, and that's part of when you build the scenario, you need to have rubrics for the task, rubrics for their team effort, so they can have peer review, as well as one of the things we wanted at the end is a embedded exam of some kind.
Yeah. And also some of this, keep me honest on this, John, but the proposal doesn't have to have this stuff on it. But once the proposal is accepted, then you go
Right.
back to work on
Yeah.
it.
Right. So these are a finished product.
Right.
As you look at a finished scenario, these are the kinds of things we want in them. So as you look at those tasks, you're going to lead those students through those tasks. You're going to provide those online resources, or directions of how to get those resources, or maybe you've done short little videos of the learning that they need to do to accomplish those. However you do that, they need to have those resources available to them on that scenario website. As you teach something, you may have to have some team meetings. You know, you're basically now the facilitator. You're not the teacher. You're the project manager, or you're the boss. You are the lead programmer, and the others are the kids are the junior programmers within this company. And so you're going to have team meetings so that you can check their progress, or redirect their thinking, or ask them questions about it. So we want to see some evidence of those team meetings within that as well. In some cases, maybe you need to have subject matter consultants come in, whether it be video or you've got guest speakers coming in. So those things can be included within that scenario. One of the other key things is with problem-based, we talked about that, remember that metacognition? No? Knowing what I know and what I don't know, and figuring out what I need to learn. That's start thinking about your thinking, and learning how to think, and learning how to realize what I need to know. And so journaling you need some kind of debriefing. So you can judge the degree or do some kind of rubric on the debriefing as well, so that the students are thinking about what they're learning. That gives you good subjective evidence as well as whether or not they're learning.
One of the things that I use in my networking class now is each week have the student blog about what they're getting out of the content and how they can apply it.
Yeah, blogging is great. All my lab reports for all my classes, the last section that I probably give quite a few points to is, what did you learn? And if they just repeat what they did, that's not good enough. I want to know their thinking process, and I want to get them thinking about that. So we need to have some kind of reflective thought. And then again, some kind of embedded exam or assessment, and I've called this their promotion exam, to try to get it so it's not you have to take a test. It's their promotion exam. And then finally, we want this to be shareable. So we need to have a fully completed scenario. Once you've field tested it, should have an instructor's guide with it. I've got an example of the Python case instructor's guide. It's about this thick. I don't think it has to be that thick. What that instructor did, it gave every possible solution and programming code for it. I don't think you need to have that, but you need to have some instructor's guide so someone else can take your scenario and task and have an idea of how to flow through that with their students.
John, could the instructor's guide come after you've piloted it in your class the first semester? Because
Yes.
that's when you're going to have,
You're going to
Some
have
good
that.
suggestions and
yeah,
tips.
that's
Yes.
where you're going to have the, oh, I tried this and this didn't work, so make sure
Right.
you do this instead.
And as well as a lot of, once I start showing you what I think should be in a draft, a lot of what's what's in that instructor's guide is going to come from the draft. You know, the objectives and those kinds of things are going to be there, but you will definitely should include all those things to help other people share that and teach that scenario. Okay, how does that sound for, does that include all the things that you understand a scenario to be kind of stuff?
That's so clear, much clearer than that day in the basement of AIM. So,
Which,
thank you for
yeah,
articulating, but that helps.
that's what frustrated me.
They're paying you as much.
Well, I will submit a bill, definitely.
Are we gonna have some standardized things that we're gonna try to share? Like, you know, I remember the problem had the need to know board and different things like that. And if you're gonna have job descriptions, we have an STI standard job description. We go to this website, everything is there, so that way when you start sharing, you know, if there's common tools. I mean, are we gonna compile common tools and then make those accessible to the other groups?
I think as we work through this, I think we'll start to develop that. For example, I don't have an idea of what the website of a scenario looks like yet. I make one and you make one, and may look different, and then down the road I think we'll combine those, as Dan said, into some kind of template so they start to look similar.
Yeah. I think that's very natural because it kind of reminds me of like the industry standards. Industry comes first and then standards almost comes later to actually build on top of stuff. So I think we probably need to be in
Right.
action and get some examples, and then we'll kind of know how to eventually standardize things or make them a little bit more converged toward the end there.
Yeah.
Are we gonna pick some industry standards, meaning in terms of objectives that we're gonna go with that are parsed down to kind of our areas, or are we just gonna create our own? Like if we're doing the database program or the database administrator, there are national standards for those things that they will be doing, objectives that they're covering. Are we gonna use those, or are we just gonna write our own?
Well, they have
That's
to follow your
whatever your
course.
class is. Yeah. So I put that in there because, you know, we want to keep this as real as possible. So it's not necessarily your objective. Well, it's your objective, but we need to make sure it's industry related.
Is this still gonna be where you can take it down and modify it? That was kind of what the.
Yeah. My understanding of as we start actually building the scenarios, your first one may be, or when you build one, Beth, and Bill wants to use it, he can take your copy and edit it and make it his copy. And then that is what is then instantiated to all of his students. So that's still in the plan. Yep.
Once we finally get one, we need to, like you said, template is the key word.
Yeah.
Right.
So we don't reinvent the wheel and you don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I think one of the intents is as we get one of them or two of them in process, then we all kind of work to make it even better. So there is, I think, some intent to have some sharing and maybe even having a time where we look at one and improve it or something.
Right. And that's why peer review, we're going to have to all look at it and add our own 2 cents into it and keep working through it. Okay? Anything that I left out, glaringly left out? Okay, so let's go on to the contract. This is the other thing I was frustrated with. Well, how do we do this? You know, what's the process? So we need to have some kind of process and some paper trail or electronic trail of how to do this. So we've come up with this contract, and these are the things I see that are necessary in the contract, and there is one more thing in there that I'll need to add. So what we would expect as you decide what area you want to do and what you want to develop, we want you to develop this draft proposal that will then be submitted to the peer review committee, myself and others, that will then go through and say, yes, you have all the things, yes, this sounds like a good one, you might modify here and here, and then go for it and approve the contract and then start getting paid for it. So these are the things I see that are necessary in this draft First of all, of course, is a description of how you're going to use this, how you're going to place it into the curriculum, and what course you're going to put it into. So it has a, what's the term I want?
Context.
Context.
Yeah.
Thank you. Leave it to the research to tell me that. It's some kind of context. And once again, I'm looking at these really as problem-based, fairly early in the course. The scenario-based people have a scenario out there on Python. I would love to teach Python to my students. But the Python that they have out there is a 4-week Python. Oh, cool. I could use that. Except it assumes that they have all this Python knowledge even before they start. It's not a beginning Python. I can't use it unless I use it at the end of a course, which I think is where she uses it. So it's almost, to me, it's a project. It's not really a problem-based one. I'd like to see us do more problem-based ones where they're learning the content through the problem and through our guidance and looking at those resources rather than just at the end. So something in context. An explanation of how much time you expect the students to work on it, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or their full semester. How you think it fits with your and other schools' curriculum. How are you going to, will other people use this, or is this just specific to you? We want to have these scenarios, once again, to be shared. That's part of the NSF contract or NSF grant, so we want these to be shareable. If they're not shareable, we may not, to be honest, we got to think about whether we're really going to fund this or not. And then finally, get down to the brass tacks here. What is it that you're really wanting them to learn? What are the key objectives of this scenario? And what are the need to know things that you want this scenario to do? List of changes in their student knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Bring it down a notch of what you really want them to think you're going to lead them through. This will also help you in building the scenario as well. And then finally, what is the company and what are the student roles? What's the job description of the student? Once again, this is a draft, so if things change, that's fine. But we need to have, once again, context of what you want to do. Description of the real business problem. This is where you might want to encourage yourself to go out and visit a business and get a business problem from a business and make it as real as possible. And then to help Dan in his development of what he needs to develop on the back end of this to support this scenario, what is the virtualized environment? Are you using Windows 98 boxes? No, I'm sorry. Windows XP, what environment do they need? Do they need a back-end server, back-end website? What kinds of things do you need to have the students to have in order to complete this? What software so that they can do this, solve their problem? Once you have that, then you can start doing a brief outline of task and maybe a couple resources. I think this is just getting an idea of how many tasks you may have in this. When I started thinking about, I wanted to do something on IP subnetting, I started realizing, okay, at what level do I want to, well, I want them to do this, but before they do that, they may have to do this and this. So I may have to back this up and kind of think through what tasks I want them to do. So just kind of showing some scaffolding and some idea of tasks you want them to do. And along with that, then, listed deliverables and maybe a draft scoring matrix of what that deliverable might have. And then some kind of draft assessment. Doesn't have to be the whole thing, but just a few questions you might ask. Once again, hopefully those questions will go back and kind of tie into those learning objectives that you said that you wanted them to do. The final thing that's not on here, and I want everybody to write this in, is we would like to have a job classification. Okay, so this is the link back to CareerLink, and in fact you can go on to CareerLink and use the career pathways on CareerLink. So we want to be able, the student that says, oh, I'm taking this scenario, this matches this job, oh, click on this CareerLink, and there's 5 jobs available on CareerLink. Oh, and they earn $40,000? Oh, cool. Let me finish this scenario real quick and then go apply. Or let me apply and let's forget the scenario. Either way, it works. Okay, so that's what I see the draft scenario to be. That will help you write it. And then the other part of the contract is how much do you want to get paid for this? Okay, and the payment, of course, will reflect the complexity of the scenario as well as the scope of the scenario, how long it's going to be. As was mentioned earlier, are you doing multiple schools? Maybe that's going to increase it. You may want to work backwards with, well, it's a full semester course. It's going to, you know, what we were saying earlier, $7,000 for a full semester. Okay, that's a total. Now let me see where the hours are. What's the contracted rate? Brad, do we have a?
That's where Tom says we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
No, we actually settled. What's the contract? What's the rate that Metro pays for curriculum development?
33, 32, 33. I thought was mentioned at some point.
I thought maybe you thought. I was trying to say 32, and you kept going, what are you trying to say? Not as smart.
You know, and it may be, is that flexible? I mean, Metro does 33, maybe.
We wanted to use the highest hourly rate that
Okay.
the schools and the consortium used. We decided that was Metro, and it was around 33. But I didn't.
Okay.
On that, what we really need is some sense of the actual hours, not that we count the clock. But the only way to know scope for it is to say, I estimate it's going to take me 3 weeks at 40 hours a week. So,
Yeah.
now, we need to have that
Right.
sort of sense to make
Yeah. So it's the hours that matter at that point. We'll all agree on a standard reimbursement rate.
And I go into that tentatively because it's not based on the hour, but you have to have some
Right.
sense of.
Right. So even though we're putting down hours, it's really dollars that we're paying, right?
Right.
So, but we're using those hours to see how the division of the contract and people.
One role that Brad would be able to figure out the money.
Yeah.
Look at these things and begin to figure out the scope of work that's here. That's a big takeaway we have from that. So help us find to get over that list.
So yeah.
The
So
way they do this the way that Ann does this down in Dallas is they do an estimate of the number of hours. They pay a flat rate per hour. I think it's around 30. And if you report your hours at the end of the time, if you go over for the scenario, you eat it. If you report, say it takes you half as much time, it's self-reported. So you can say, you know, that this only took 20 hours. Brad, we said 40, it only took 20. You should pay us for 20 hours. So
Right, again, that's what I was trying to say, it's only about the scope of work. It's not
Yeah.
really on-
yeah.
What do your, just to take 30 seconds right now, what do your organizations pay for curriculum development?
Nothing.
So 30 sounds pretty
30
good.
sounds really good to me, Brad. This is part of my
Off-contract work is
contract.
25 for Bill. So it's going to
Yeah.
be around the 33
Yeah.
number. Pardon? Yours is just your hourly wage. Okay. So it'll be around the 33 number, and then it'll be up to your school to decide if all that goes to you, or if they want to take the indirect rate out of that. And by the way, taking the indirect rate puts you guys in a bad spot. We'll raise it $1 or something. We don't want you guys to suffer for that. So.
Okay.
John, on this draft scenario too, the intent, like for instance, for just the draft proposal, when we say like a draft exam or assessment, we might mean a pretty sketchy sample few questions or something,
Yes.
not like the full
Not,
assessment or
not
that
the
kind of
full
thing.
assessment, just
Let
a
us
few
know what
questions.
direction you're headed and that
Right.
kind of stuff. So the intent of that is not to have a whole bunch of front-end loaded work and then you propose it.
Right.
I mean, it's really to be enough to let the people give you some feedback and,
Right.
and not to be bogged down on that first step. But
Right.
just to be clear enough about where you want to head. So,
That same line, you know, with assessment kind of things that we have to do. For example, my project management class have a pre-assessment, which is kind of like a watered down final that they take, doesn't count against them, and then they take it at the end. And it's something that's very second year kind of a class. They're prereqs to it. They almost always score, you know, 30 to 40 pre-test and post-test. A lot of them score 60 or 80 to whatever. I mean, they raise their points quite a bit. They did the same thing in Intro to IT, and it was very detailed, and they hardly raise their scores at all. So it's very important on how you make up your tests. But that could be a component in this. That would be
Yes.
a great shareable thing. Just
Yes.
pre-test, post-test
You could-
kind of a thing.
yeah.
right.
And
And
that's what the goal is to teach those concepts with the project. If we could build that in somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not, it's great to have a pre-test, post-test, but it's not necessary. You could just have a post-test or whatever, you know.
Right.
I like that because then you can go to your register and say, see how much they
Yeah, right.
that's right. So yeah, pre-test, post-test can be done, but it's not necessary. We're just looking for some kind of post-test. And once again, that post-test will be, the scores will be outside of the actual environment so that the scores will be able to be correlated and summarized. So we'll use some of that
The
data.
intent would be, you know,
Yeah.
several years from now, within the career link system and stuff, you could actually do some correlations with, you know, how well students are doing and paths and stuff.
So that's why we have that assessment in there. As far as the hours, so you're going to figure out your hours, and then I've got some subcategories for putting in. We want you to be able to get paid for the development of the contract because you did spend some time on that. We do understand that there will probably be some contracts that get started and never get finished. So that's you want to get paid for some of the work you did, and if it just flops, then it stops, you know,
Right.
kind of thing.
But you still got paid for that work.
Right.
So that's the nice.
So we want to have idea of who's responsible, how many hours they're going to spend on it. That way you could have multiple faculty within your school or between schools getting paid for different hours or percentage of those hours, when you expect things to be done, as well as maybe you want to set up a recurring payment, is my understanding. Maybe it's once a month you want payment coming in, so you're getting paid as you work. And or if you want to say, I expect to have it done by this time, and so wait till I get it done and then pay me. Once again, that's up to each individual school and how you want to do it.
That's exactly right, and we can work that out with you on a one-on-one basis based on what you feel is fair. One of the reasons we set it up this way is so Beth's idea that we didn't have in our minds calling it or thinking of it as a super scenario, but the idea of the super scenario really works in this context, where all the schools can get together and say, I'll take this part, I'll take this part, I'll take this part, I'll take. The whole thing is 1,000 hours, let's say, but it's going to create this scenario that we might call NSF 10 scenarios, because it might have 10 huge tasks underneath
Right.
it.
Or 30, we
Or
just have
30,
one big
we should have
scenario.
one big one. Yeah, but we could do that too. So we wanted to create with the maximum amount of flexibility. I want to talk to Ann a little more, and I've tried to contact her. I'll try again about how they do it. I think they pay half up front and half upon completion, but we don't necessarily have to do that. So
Right.
I want to see what's worked.
And the other thing I think that this works really nice is that, you know, like that field testing, maybe the scenario I want to develop isn't related to a class that I teach. So I could do a great scenario and then maybe have Bill field test it or something else. So there could be partnerships, not even have to be within your own institution, could be
Right.
in some other institution.
Right. And once again, this is a draft contract, or not draft contract. It's you're proposing, and it's a negotiation between everybody as to whether this will work or not. course, if I put in, I'm putting 1,000 hours for a 1-week scenario, some people may complain about that, and we negotiate the hours I'm actually getting paid. So, and we'll, as Tom says, as we'll get down the road, we'll realize, all right, if you're developing a 4-week course, yeah, it's going to take you this long to do it. We'll have a better idea as we go down the road as to how this all works. So, as we are all flexible and continue to be flexible, that's great.
Exactly. Let's pursue speed and value over fear of making mistakes.
Right.
If we make a few mistakes, we can live with that as long as we're moving forward and providing value.
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, just re-clarify again the payment.
That's not my question.
Well, that's mine. Okay, you raised your hand. See, it's about me.
That's right.
It's all
That was a
about
nice
me.
goal.
Well, you asked your question first, and you raised your hand.
So, I've got this, I've been a good meeting, the fact that I understand things a little clearer, but I still have some questions, and the one would be, I understand subnetting very well. I think it's a wonderful, I think it's a business problem, you have to use IT to solve it. What are, in your mind, how are you gonna use the virtualization to help it? Because why do you need to go to the cloud to do subnetting? I have a lot of these ideas, and I'm having a struggle tying them to the cloud. So, and that's kind of the requirement. It's
Yeah.
a business problem solved with IT, utilizing the cloud.
Resource sharing, please.
Well,
Virtual problem in the cloud that you're doing it on, isn't it like virtual PC, you could configure it, can you do the same thing networking wise, virtual labs where you
But the
have
thing is,
virtual machines.
but-
you're-
I
but
don't
the-
want to use the cloud for the sake of using the cloud so we can meet the requirements of the grant.
I see what you're saying is,
It can be
I've
done
created this
independently.
scenario subnetting.
Right.
I have my students go into the cloud on their virtual desktops, and then what do I do? Why am I using that? Well, one example might be Brad gave me an excellent Excel spreadsheet that shows subnetting. Maybe that's the resource I have shared on the cloud. I would love to have it actually have them go in and set the IP addresses of a number of other virtual machines. I'm not sure Dan is up to that, whether I would do that. Now, I would do that on my own boxes, even own virtual boxes, have them go into ESXi, and here's 3 machines, and now you have to set the IP address and go once more into remote into them and make sure they can ping. So, or not ping, since they're in separate subnets.
I mean, we have, when I taught subnetting, I did have an Excel sheet that had every address broken out binary into
Right.
your IP address, and it'd be on the LMS. They would download it from the LMS. We would never go to the cloud for that.
Right.
And
But
so
isn't,
that's my struggle.
but isn't, the cloud is gonna be where the scenario is housed.
Right.
Not necessarily the tools that you have to use to solve it. So if Chris is writing and Beth are writing the office application scenario, then they're not